ever spent any time with a therapist or a counselor, you've probably heard that there are two of the most dangerous words in the human vocabulary. What if? We see it every day, right? This phrase, what if? It's what keeps us awake in the middle of the night, wondering what's going to happen in the future, creating scenarios of the worst case possible could happen. What if I lose my job? What if the diagnosis is bad? What if this scratchy throat is an illness? What if I fail? Now, a close cousin to those two words is if only. That's a phrase that keeps us locked in the past. If only I had chosen this. If only I had done this differently. If only, if what? All of this is about regret, and it paralyzes us in a sense. But today, I think we're going to redeem the phrase, what if? When we bring this what if phrase into the presence of God, I believe that we can see something new, that we can have an imagination of God's great love and kingdom. So what if? What if the Apostle John had the vision that we see in the book of Revelation? What if he had that in mind when he wrote the gospel? So John, having lived with Jesus, following Jesus during his ministry, and then John going forth to be a missionary and then being exiled on the island, getting the vision, understanding a little bit more of who God and Jesus was. Then John says, well, now I remember and see all the things that Jesus said and did differently. Maybe it gave John a different point of view. So what if John had the end of the story before he wrote the start of the story? So that is what we are going to live into a little bit today, to think about how that imagery of the book of Revelation might help us see this familiar passage of John 15 a little differently. So we think about what's happened here. In John 15, this is taking place around the table that night before Jesus died. So we understand what has happened as they've been dining together. Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. He tells them, I have a new commandment for you, love one another. He talks about the Holy Spirit. He tells them again that he's going to die, and where he's going to go, they cannot follow, but the Holy Spirit will come to them. And then he has what we would say is the last of his I am statements. I am the true vine, and you are the branches. When we think about then what book of Revelation tells us at the very end of that vision is that Jesus sits on the throne by God, and from that throne comes the water of life. And the water of, or the river of life, the water, is nourishment for the tree of life that stands on either side of the river. And those trees have leaves and fruit, all kinds of fruit that blooms and blossoms all through the year. 12 different fruits is what we're told. So those fruits are what is to be, will endure. It never dies. And those leaves, we are told in the book of Revelation, are healing for all of the nations. And so when we see or we hear Jesus say, I am the vine and you are the branches, go and bear fruit. If you remain in me and I remain in you, then your fruit will bear, but your fruit must endure. So this idea that the tree of life, it's almost like what Jesus is saying to his disciples on that night is that you are the ones who will feed the nations. You are the one who will bring healing to the world. You are the one. You are the ones who will bring God's kingdom to earth. What if the love that Jesus is asking us to bear today is God's very kingdom becoming reality here and now. When Jesus said, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Jesus wasn't saying you can do less. You're still going to do a few things. You're just not going to be quite as good. He says you can do nothing apart from me. Jesus is the soul, our soul provider, our groundedness. Everything that Jesus did and said through the lens of John the Apostle tells us or shows us a little bit of what it means to live as humans, to be in this world as God's children. Apart from Jesus, we can do nothing, because his love and his grace and his power is well beyond ours. And so bearing fruit gives us the opportunity for others to see Christ in us. To love one another is medicinal. To have Christian love is to be forgiving and generous and hospitable, to do acts of justice as well as acts of devotion. And it's not just about moral duties. When Jesus said to love one another and remain in my love, and my love will remain in you, he wasn't inviting us to the campfire and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. This was a deep moral imperative to love one another. And this is very bold, right? This idea to love so boldly when it's not convenient, when it isn't easy, when people will look at us strange, when people might even reject us. But this is the commandment Jesus gave his disciples and gave to us as well. Love one another as I have loved you. And then Jesus says, for no greater love does one have than to lay one's life down for his friends. But how do we love boldly without first recognizing or accepting the bold love of God and Jesus Christ for ourselves? I mean, God is so wild with God's love. God doesn't wait for us to get all of our stuff together, to get our life in line. God doesn't wait for us to check off the list of reading the Bible all the way through every single year. God doesn't wait for us to say the correct prayer at the correct time with the right kind of heart. God loved us before we even exited our mother's wombs. God, we are told, formed us fearfully and wonderfully. God's love has been a part of who we are before we ever made any mistakes. Therefore, that bold kind of love sits within us always, enabling us to be bold in our love. Now, back in May of 2025, our United Methodist Council of Bishops adopted a new, kind of improved mission statement for the United Methodist Church. And it says, the United Methodist Church forms disciples of Jesus Christ who, empowered by the Holy Spirit, love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously in local communities and in worldwide connections. You see, as United Methodists, we know that we have been loved so wildly, and that the world needs to have more boldness in terms of love, that the world needs more healing that can come from within us, that is the call of the church in our world, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and in our lives. And so to love boldly might mean that we have radical hospitality. So when we see someone who's new, when we find someone who is different from us, that we don't wait until they make eye contact with us, but that we go and welcome them and embrace them, maybe not with a hug, but embrace them with your heart, with that love, right? We don't have to, cross boundaries that aren't right, but radical hospitality, right, is what brings us together when there are divides. Loving boldly looks like having incredible, courageous forgiveness, because we know that people will let us down. We know that people will hurt us. But to be courageous enough to forgive the way we have been forgiven. Loving boldly looks like sacrificial service. It looks like giving up a Sunday morning of worship to work in our courtyard to provide burritos for our friends who are unhoused and hungry. It might look like giving up a night during the week to serve at another organization or come to church and be with others. And loving boldly looks like persistent peacemaking. Because we know that there are a lot of voices and forces in this world that wish to divide us, that wish to make others an enemy of us. So to love boldly means that we bring people together and unite that which divides us. So when John wrote his gospel, what if he was looking back at the life of Jesus through the lens of the heavenly vision that he received in what we call the book of Revelation? What if John knew the end of the story? That he knew that the darkness and the hate and the powers of this world would not have the final word. That God would be victorious and is victorious. That there is a tree of life in which the healing of the nations is rooted. Because we know the end of the story, we don't have to be afraid. We can be bold in all that we do and all that we say. We don't have to put it on a banner or look at it on the screens. We can love boldly because that is what God has asked us to do, to bring healing to our community. So church, let us go from this place not to be timid, but to inhabit and to embrace boldness, to have holy confidence. Let us go forth abiding in the vine that nourishes us so that we may bear fruit, the kind of fruit that not only lasts, but has impact